is like my fifth video today. I'm gonna read out of the Narcotic Anonymous book, chapter 4. We Agnostics. So let's proceed in reading. Yes, I'm an alcoholic and I am an addict. So let's start reading. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear about the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. If when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably an alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't too difficult. About half our original fellowship will of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope. We were not true alcoholics, but after a while we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. If a more code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live and had it to be a power greater than ourselves. Officially, but will, and we, how will we to find his power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. It means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as he discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship, but his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we open a subject which our man thought he had neatly invaded or entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up particular idea of him, with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected the particular conception because it seemed inaccurate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring nautical systems, and inexplainable comedy with deep skepticism. We looked at any individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it at all? And who could comprehend a supreme being somehow? Yes, and in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit light, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experience. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even through it was impossible for many of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. Much of our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another conception of God. Our own conception, however, inadequate as sufficient to make the approach and to effort a contact with him as soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things. We began to possess of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the William of Spirit, are broad, roomy, all exclusive, never exclusive, or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean our own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth. To effort our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere, so we use our own conception, however limited it was. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question: Do I now believe, and I am even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon the simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. That was great news for us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith, which seemed difficult to believe. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes, but I cannot accept as surely true that the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simple level, besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith. We often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us buster with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Through some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside with such with feelings faced with alcohol destruction. We soon became as open-minded as spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great prostrator. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. The reader may still ask why I should believe in a power greater than myself. We think there are good reasons. Let us have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without the murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable acceptation as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of exceptions, for which there is good evidence that no perfect visual proof, and does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world, that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate the prosthetic steel grater is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, that these laws could laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. However, the perfect logical deception is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is a all-powerful, creative intelligence right there. Our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we lavishly set out to convince ourselves that isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy argument, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Will our contentions true? It would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists choose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us wasn't it. We who have traveled this destructive path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human faith fatalities of rigorous faith may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception of whatever we used to amuse ourselves by chemically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices, when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons at all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of a wholesale condemnation. We talk of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life on a fair hearing. In our personal stories, you will find a validation of in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with the particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which of our purpose. We need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible, as a celebrated American statesman put it. Let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women worldly indeed. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than ourselves, than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward the power and to do certain simple things. There has been revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of the human resources, they found that a new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flowed into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements once confused and baffled by seemingly and furtherly of existence. They showed the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going to life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them. When many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. This world of ours has made more material progress in the last century than in all millenniums which went before. Almost everyone knows the reason. Students of ancient history tell us that intelligence of men in those days was equal to the best of today. Yet, in ancient time, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown in the realm of the material. Men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some of the contemporaries of Columbus thought a round of preposterous. Others came near getting Galileo to death for his astronomical theories. We ask ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the real of the spirit as we, the ancients, about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to point an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all effects at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best best mathematical minds have proved man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved the privilege to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of the air was almost an old story. And airplane travel was in full swing. But in most fields, our generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman a Sunday supplement describing a proposal to explore the moon by means of a rocket, and he will say, I bet they do it. Maybe not so long either. Is not our age criticized by the ease with which we discard old ideas for new, by the complete readiness with which we throw away the theory or gadget with does not work for something new which does. We have to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems this same readiness to change our point of view. We will have trouble with personal relationships. We shouldn't control our emotional natures. We were a prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a living of uselessness. We were full of fear and were unhappy. We couldn't even to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of these the developments more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight. Of course it was. When we when we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work, but the God idea did. The Wright brothers almost childish faith that they could build a machine which would fly was the main spring of their accomplishments. Without that, nothing could have happened. We economics and atheists were sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. When others showed us that God simply worked with them, we began to feel like those who had interested the rights would never fly. Logic of great stuff. We liked it. We still like it. It is not by chance we were given the power to reason, to examine the evidence of our senses, and to draw conclusions. That is one of man's magnificent attitudes. We agnostically inclined would not feel satisfied with a proposal which does not lend itself to reasonable approach to interpretation. Hence, we are at pains to tell why we think our present faith is reasonable. Why do we think it more than illogical and to believe than not to believe? Why we say our former thinking was soft and mushy when we threw up our hands in doubt and said we don't know? When we became alcoholics crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else. He is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was the choice to be? Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land have brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. friendly hands had stretched out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily in reason for the last mile, and we did not like to lose our support. That was natural, but let us think a little more closely without knowing it. Had we not been brought to where we stood by certain kind of faith, for did not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but the short of faith? Yes, we have been faithful, objectively faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. We found too that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental goose flesh that used to being on. Had we not worship people, sentiment things, money, and ourselves, and then with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or the flower, who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with poor reason? Little or nothing, we saw at last, will not these things the tissue out of which our lives were contracted? Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we have been living by faith in little else. Imagine life without faith, with nothing left but poor reason. It wouldn't be life. But we believed in life. Of course we did. We could not prove life in the sense that you could prove a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, yet there it was. Could we still say the whole thing was nothing but a mass of electrons created out of nothing, meaning nothing, whirling on to a destiny of nothingness? Of course we couldn't. The electrons themselves seemed more intelligent than that, at least so the chemist said. Hence we saw that reason isn't everything, neither is reason, as most of us use it, entirely dependable. Through it and emanate our best minds. What about people who prove that man could never fly? Yet, we have been seeing another kind of flight, a spiritual liberation from this world. People who rose above the problems. They say God made these things possible, and we only smiled. We had we had seen spiritual release and light to tell ourselves it wasn't true. Exactly, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child, in the fundamental, fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured as company by pomp, by what's up of other things, but in some form or another, it is there. For faith in the power greater than ourselves. A mysterious demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup. Just as much as the feeling we have for a friend, sometimes we have to search fearlessly, but we was there, but was as much a fact as we were. We found the great reality deep down within us in the last analysis. It is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. We can only clear the ground a bit if our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to trust deliberately within yourself, then if you wish, you can join us on the broad hallway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of our belief is sure to come to you. In this book, you will read the experience of a man who thought he was an atheist. His story is so interesting that some of it should be told now. His change of heart was dramatic, convincing, and moving. Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide, and these culminates in his intimate family embittered depressed him. Post-war disillusionment, ever more serious alcoholism, depending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. One night, when confined in a hospital, he was approached by a alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. Our friend George rose as it bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question: Is it possible that all the religious people I know are wrong? While pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? This man recounts that the tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by a conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with constantly and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years was swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He he had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in cautious companionship with this Creator. Those was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No matter vicissitude and had shaken it, his alcoholic problem was taken away that very night years ago, and it disappeared, save for a brief moment of temptation. The thought of drink has never returned, and at such times a great revolution has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. What is this but a miracle of healing? Yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe, to humbly offer himself to his Maker. Then he knew, even so as God restored us all to our right minds, to this man the revelation of was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, it disclosed himself to us. Praise God. I'm going to tell you a little story about my first experience with God. When I was in the shower down at Fort Loud, I was living in a halfway house. I had a vision of blood in my hands, with 2 holes in my hands. that's when I turned my life around. God, I got on my knees and prayed to forgive me for everything I've done. So, that's my experience.